I tell people I knew Wendell was sick the day that his bird feeders didn't have anything in them. He was misdiagnosed. He was misdiagnosed with dementia and general anxiety disorder. And he was isolated, incredibly isolated. He was scared. He was terrified. Understand as best you can what kind of dementia you might be dealing with. One of the things that I remember distinctly that helped me a great deal was...
Welcome to the Dementia Doc podcast. And today I have a guest that we both, Miguel and myself, absolutely love and adore, Pat Gottman. Pat is a caregiver, and she will tell more about herself because I think she had the incredible journey herself facing dementia with her husband. And when she speaks about caregiving, last time we spoke, Pat, you said caregiving can be a joy. And when I see you say that, there's so much truthfulness in your eyes when you say that. Like, it's not toxic positivity, so to say, but I think it's an earned statement. And that's what I wanted to speak to you about.
Okay.
Let's talk maybe a little bit with your journey with dementia. How long have you been a caregiver? How it began? Just to give the audience a little bit of a backstory for you to get to know you, and then we'll go into the journey of caregiving being a joy.
Okay. And I hope I don't give you too much detail. It really started for us in late 2016. We were snowbirds. We had two homes, and we were going back and forth. Our grandchildren were young. And so we would go back by Mother's Day, and then we'd come back to Florida for the winters. And then we'd spend the summers up with the grandkids. In 2016, I noticed that my husband was slowing down considerably and didn't think too much of it. I really thought, well, this is normal aging, and we are driving back and forth. We are taking care of two large homes. That's a lot. So in 2017, we began thinking about getting down to one home. And long story short, 2017 was a big decline year for us. And one of his earliest symptoms was apathy. Suddenly, everything he cared about stopped happening. And he became very reclusive. He didn't want to go places. He didn't want to do things. He didn't want to continue to do things that he absolutely loved. And so we did. We got down to one home, but I knew there was something terribly wrong. And after Irma, we literally got back here and Irma hit. He just went to pieces. He just went to pieces. And he was misdiagnosed. He was misdiagnosed with dementia and general anxiety disorder. And at the same time, they did no physical assessment. They made that assessment. They hospitalized him. They put him on a whole bunch of drugs and sent us home. And 2018 was another year of kind of continuous decline. It was much more subtle, but it was continuous decline. And he, at that point in time, did not want to talk about anything in terms of additional help. He was taking his meds, he was seeing his psychiatrist, and I was to stay out of that. And I did. I tried to respect his autonomy. I tried to give him all the space and all the dignity that he required. But he was declining. I knew he was declining, and our relationship was declining very seriously. And so finally, after a lot of canceled trips and a lot of very painful experiences, and again, this constant knowledge that I knew there was something terribly wrong, I basically said, I am not going to stay if we don't have a complete physical work. And that was toward the end of 2018. By March, we knew he had dementia. We were just not sure what kind of dementia. he had Parkinsonism. They could not diagnose full-blown Parkinson's, but he had a lot of Parkinson traits. And by then, he was just declining his aphasia. He had word-finding issues. He was going totally within himself. Long story short, we got through a very rough year where Dr. Rivera had to wean him off of a lot of drugs that he should not have been on with the dementia, and then also started to get him on some things that would help him not only slow the progression, but also allow him some quality of life. He had a high level of agitation. He had a high level of anxiety. So it wasn't until 2020 when we did the second PET scan that we realized that it was most likely Lewy body dementia. And more than likely, he'd had that the entire time. I just didn't have the knowledge to understand how to help him.
Mm. I think it's a fascinating story. First, that so many people think only about memory loss and
hmm
the person is forgetting something, but that you see apathy, and
Yeah.
apathy can be a big signal. And second, to have the proper diagnosis.
Mhm.
So you went 4 years of not having the right diagnosis, and sometimes people wonder, well, how does it matter? It's dementia. There's no cure. But to even understand what is happening, what I hear that you say, once you understood it's Lewy body dementia, that certain expressions that affect your relationship, how you see your husband, that it's expression of the disease and not his personality or his attitude to you.
Yeah.
Um, it must have been really hard for years.
Well, once I understood it was dementia, I realized that it is a memory loss all the time. And I realized that there are a lot of different types of dementia. And I started educating myself. And as I educated myself, I felt less lost in terms of understanding the symptoms that I was seeing. As you indicated, understanding this was the disease, this was not him. Um, I certainly became um, more realistic in terms of understanding there wasn't going to be a cure here. There was only care that I could give him. Still was very difficult for us. It still was a very, very tough time for me. But what I found is that when I became more educated and I became more aware of what was happening to him, I understood better how I could help him. And one of those things was basically becoming his advocate
Mm.
instead of his caregiver. And that really made that mental shift that I needed to A, make me feel like I was more of the process, um, B, continue to educate myself on how I could help him more, um, C, understand the grieving that we were both going through and getting really both of us help at a very different level on that. And one of the things that I remember distinctly that helped me a great deal was I saw a quote on some feed coming through my phone by Ram Dass that said, "We're all just here to walk each other home."
Mm.
And I finally put into context for myself what God was asking me to do. And pulling on my faith, realized that all he really wanted me to do was focus on giving Wendell the quality of life that he could, the best quality of life that he could possibly have for as long as he was still with us. Uh, that and a great doctor who understood that we needed to do some very, very serious things to get him back to even. Um, has given us time together that I never imagined we would have. If anybody had told me back in that time that he'd still be here, let alone doing this well in 2024, I never would have believed that.
Mm. And when you first, I think there are so many things that we can go into, and that's why I hope you will be back on the podcast. And I'm sure that a lot of caregivers who are listening can relate to your story. But if we zoom in into this perspective of becoming an advocate
Mhm.
versus a caregiver, what is the difference for you?
For me, caregiving was taking care of all the things that he needed to do. Chief cook and bottle washer, making sure that his medications were refilled, getting him through each day, helping him with his activities of daily living, all chores, all hard things, and all very redundant things that we never had to do before. It's the heavy lifting that all caregivers recognize and that. But I also needed to be his support mechanism. Because of this apathy, he really isolated himself, so much so that I could barely engage him in a conversation. He certainly didn't want to see any of his friends. He certainly didn't have anything to say to his grandkids who were now 1,000 miles away. Uh, and he was isolated, incredibly isolated. He was scared. He was terrified. He was acting as I think many dementia patients do. He was worried for his own safety. That was the thing that drove him every day was, am I safe? He didn't want to fall. He didn't want to go outside. He didn't want to do anything physical therapy because he was afraid he was going to get hurt.
And to ask you a question here, that was not Wendell that you knew your whole life.
Not at all. My husband, one, is an extremely bright engineer by trade, but he's also an outdoorsman. He's also very handy. I tell people I knew Wendell was sick the day that his bird feeders didn't have anything in them
Mm.
because he was a consummate gardener. We had beautiful flower gardens. He woodworked in his retirement. He read, voraciously. Uh, he got up before me in the morning and went to bed after I did at night. He was always on the go. And because we had two homes, we were always outside.
Mm.
We'd be up north in the summer and he'd be working in his flower gardens and that sort of thing. He was never idle, let alone sitting in a chair for hours on end, doing nothing,
Mm.
and I would try everything. I would try the puzzles. I would try the conversations. I would try everything you read in the books for trying to engage a loved one, and nothing worked. And so as I became better educated and I made the mindset switch because I had to stop thinking of him as my spouse. So many people tell you, oh, you shouldn't be the caregiver. You should go back to being the spouse. Once your loved one progresses to a certain level, you can't be the spouse in the way you previously understood that in a myriad of ways. I lost my best friend. I lost my confidant. I lost the person we used to debate politics with. I mean, everything that went into what I felt was a perfect marriage was pretty much gone.
Mm.
And I remember it was something that spurred it. But I remember thinking to myself, if one of your young grandchildren just asked you that, you would very willingly have done that with a smile. It's because your husband is asking you that you are somehow reacting negatively. So I had to do a mind switch. I had to become the parent.
Mm.
Very difficult for a spouse to do, but very important. And if you're caring for a child, it's the same situation. If you're caring for a sibling, if you're caring for a parent, those roles change when your loved one progresses to a certain extent. And you, as caregiver, have to be willing to make that switch. I think that's part of advocacy. You're willing to stand up for them. You're willing to meet them where they are. You're willing to celebrate what's left, not mourn what's gone and what's lost. You are there to say, today's the only thing that matters. How do I find joy today? What can I do today to bring any bit of joy to my loved one? And at the end of the day, what will I feel really good about? And where will I find joy in advocating for this human being? And I do now. I live every day, one day at a time. I don't plan a lot about anything. We don't plan vacations or plan, outings or plan dinner out. We don't go out for the most part as a couple. That doesn't mean I am not moving forward with my own life. And I have my own interests at this point. I have my own purpose. But the reality of it is the time that I spent with him is all about trying to find joy with him today. And we do. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh, and there's so much, I think, for any human being just to let go of a certain identity. Because some people may listen to you, and there's this notion don't talk to elderly people as children. And I just want to point out, I don't think that is what you're saying, that you need to talk to them as children, or even sometimes maybe we talk to children because we don't respect the human being inside. We think that they don't understand. But it's not even that category. You're just saying that that's a reframe that helped you to no longer see Wendell at the standard that you saw before, and grieve and let go of that relationship and see that right now it's a different relationship.
Yeah.
And having image of your grandchildren helps you to relate while you still advocating for his dignity, for the joy. And the other thing that came to my mind, I remember there's a parable or a little story when there's one guy who is carrying the bricks and someone asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm carrying the bricks." And then the next guy with the big smile carrying a brick, and someone asked him, "What are you doing?" It's like, "I'm building a temple."
Mhm.
And I think when you speak about being a caregiver, you focus on all the things that need to be done, on the routines that need to be done. Your shift of perspective, what is that I can find joy today? Doesn't mean that you wouldn't be doing the chores that have to be done, but it's that, am I carrying the brick or am I building the temple?
Yeah. And I can give you another example of that, a more concrete one. When I first understood what was going on with Wendell, I was in total control. I was making sure he was eating right. I was making sure he was getting his exercise. I was making sure that all of the things that we think are so critically important to our health are gospel. And he would fight me on most all of those. And we were constantly sparring because I thought that's what he needed. And the reality was he kept telling me what he needed. I just wasn't listening. And you know what? He didn't get the shower that day, or he didn't get the walk that day, or he didn't get that walk this week. It's okay if the day and if the situation and if the mindset doesn't allow for it, it's not the end of the day. You do not have to say, we shower on Tuesdays and Fridays. No, we don't. We shower whenever it makes good sense to us to shower in a time when it works for him. And letting that stuff go and being aware that sometimes when they're giving you a hard time, I think it's because they're maintaining what little control they have left over in their life. And if they can still do that, the people they feel most safe doing that with is you,
Yeah.
the caregiver.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think it's almost a testament to giving them the dignity to still
Mhm.
be them. When, I can't imagine any time we go to our spouse at any point in the marriage, you should be doing this and you should be doing this.
You know, and you get to
Yeah.
the point that you feel like, routine's very important to my husband. And so I'm always as faithful as I possibly can be to that routine. And anything that I plan for myself is done outside of that routine. So that's really, really critical that I stay fairly faithful to that. But if something doesn't happen in the routine, it's not anything that disrupts the day. It just wasn't meant to happen that day. Instead, if we go off into a conversation, I have learned to, when he says something, especially if it's in the past, I probe. I ask questions about it. Um, you would be amazed with stories I've heard from his very early years that I don't think he even remembered when he was well, but he's got them all and he's got the details and he enjoys talking about them. So now instead of, yeah, I've heard this story a million times, I'll ask a question. Tell me more about it. How did that make you feel? Um, and he engages. And sometimes we have delightful conversations. Sometimes I see glimmers of my old husband. Um, but it is a delight for me to be able to help him go back there and to feel that those are important. That those are times that whether he's remembering them because they were scary or because they were joyful, he, for whatever reason, something has triggered his need to tell me or to share that with me.
Mm. And Pat, for you, what allowed you to let go of a certain sense of control, I guess? Because, when I would assume you see your husband withering and you try to get the diet and the exercise and everything, there is a sense of control to preserve the reality that you want. Was there a moment, was it just a click? Was it gradual? But what is it that you had to let go to allow for that shift?
The mindset had to change to quality of life, not quantity of life.
Mm.
We are trained as individuals to do all of these healthy things to extend our lives. And it's just ingrained in us. It's just always, how do we extend life? I think with dementia patients, the only focus should be on quality of life. And I think it needs to be on short term quality of life because everything can change again tomorrow. Through our journey, we have what I call fall off periods where he loses more capability and we have to, we get out of equilibrium. So we have to balance back. We have to basically get back into a new routine, whatever that has to be. But I think the other side of that is I'm only worried about today. If I wake him up at his start of his routine and I see those baby blues and he recognizes me and smiles and tells me he's had a nice sleep and is ready to start the day, that's joyful. I'm grateful that that's it. If at night after he's gone to bed, I realize we had no hiccups, we had no problems, we had no anxieties, that's a good day. That's great. We've had a really good day. On the days where we've had good and thoughtful conversations, or we've had these reminiscences, or he has hit some milestone in his puzzle book that he's so proud of that we've celebrated that. Those are the kinds of things that matter. And I'm not saying that's easy. For all of us caregivers, one, it's so difficult to see that. But two, it's so difficult to find joy in that because all you can think about is the losses. Celebrating a puzzle in a book is not something my husband would have ever even commented on, let alone wanted, some recognition that he had actually accomplished something like that. So it comes gradually, I think, but I think it's also that mindset shift set that says I am only interested in quality.
Mm.
So
Now, when you work with other caregivers, so you have support groups, you have your ministry, uh, what do you think helps people to make the shift? And what could be the biggest obstacle to
I
not
think
get there?
I think two things. First of all, the ministry was a lifesaver for me because it gave me purpose in why I'm on this journey. Beyond just the purpose of seeing my husband home, I basically realized that based on my knowledge and my experience and my education on dementia, I could help others who hadn't been exposed to those things. There are really two things that I recommend to any caregiver to begin with, possibly three. Um, the first one is to get educated, to get reports, get a copy of every single report that your loved one has had doctor's notes, tests. And even if you have to Google them, Google and understand what those reports are telling you. Understand dementia. Understand as best you can what kind of dementia you might be dealing with. Oftentimes it's mixed dementia. So no, two people fit into the same mold. But number one, you have to do that. You have to be able to arm yourself with knowledge to be able to understand what you're seeing. The second thing that I preach is self-care. You must take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not only hurting yourself, you're hurting your loved one. Because more than likely, if you are a full-time caregiver, there's nobody else who could step in and do that job. There certainly isn't anybody better than you to do the job. So you need to stay healthy for both of you. And that's not just physical health, seeing the doctors, doing your routine maintenance, that sort of thing. That's also your emotional health. And what I have found was so helpful for me was other caregivers.
Mm.
There is nobody who understands what you're feeling quicker without any explanation than another caregiver. Guaranteed in our support groups, when someone comes in, no matter what they say, heads start nodding around the room. There's instant validation. There's instant sharing of ideas. This is what worked for us. This is what, it may not work for you, but it gives you hope. It instantly gives you someone who understands and someone who gives you hope that this too, whatever the particular issue is, can be solved. I was very isolated, especially during COVID. And that's when all of this really came to the fore for me, is I knew I could not continue to be isolated, that I had to get out and I had to share what I knew with other caregivers. And since then, we have grown into, other areas of helping caregivers. But so many people say, I want to go back to the way it was. And you have to realize that once you're on this journey and once you're a ways into this journey, you are no longer the person you used to be. Even if by magic, your loved one was put right back there, you aren't. You are no longer that person. My bucket list today looks very different than my bucket list back then looked in terms of what I thought was important for the rest of my life. But taking that forward then in getting other people involved in that, and walking with other people who are walking the same kind of journey, I think is extremely helpful in helping to make that mindset change.
I think that's, again, the testimony that we often repeat here, that right now the notion of health has extended to being a social human being.
Mhm.
Because when we're isolated, and I'm assuming also in caregiving, there could be a lot of shame if all of a sudden you told your loved one something that you feel, "Oh, I should have never said that,"
Mhm.
or whatever, you didn't cope, or maybe he told you something that you think, "Oh my gosh, I can't even tell anybody that that's how my
Yes.
husband talked to me." And reaching out to other people.
Mhm.
I think we spoke to you offline about going through an addiction, that I know what an eating disorder is. And such a big part of it is actually calling someone and saying, I'm having a bad day. That
Mhm.
just cuts through those chains of, I'm the only one and I can't cope with it. Something is so wrong with me, to just the notion, okay, I'm not the only one. Other
Yes.
people feel that too. And that, it's like a little sprout of the new hope. And then you can get inspired by other people, as you say, shift that identity that is so hard to shift, and like the chains that keep holding us to what was. And it's not easy. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
probably also a lot of tears together with other people. But those tears are so much more. I don't even know what's the word, especially I'm not a caregiver, so I never want to say I completely understand. But I also think at the core of a human experience, there is something very human, that how we all feel lonely or in that darkness of a cave, or
Mhm.
there's a certain
Mhm.
purpose and a story that we're all living.
Yeah.
So I hope that people who are listening can have at least one. If they don't have a caregiver support group, even though I think today even they can find that online, at least they have one person they can call and say, "Hey, I'm having a bad day."
Mhm. And more than likely, it's going to be another caregiver.
Yeah.
And there's purpose in your being able to help another caregiver too. So we call them care pals. And, it's so cute because, they end up, they become, they text back and forth on their phones, no matter what the issue is or what the joy is. And they become friends through this process. But you're there for each other, and that's one of the things about asking for help. It's so difficult for us to ask for help, but it's much easier if we're asking for help from someone we feel we can help too. So, I'm having a bad day, so I'm going to talk to you. But when you have a bad day, I want you to know you can talk to me, and we're both having a bad day, then we just cry together. But more than likely, on your bad day, I'm going to be able to give you something to give you some help.
And I hear that you often turn it back to purpose.
Mhm.
Purpose in caregiving, purpose in being a support for another caregiver, purpose in asking for help, purpose in running a ministry. So, is purpose the key in finding joy?
Well, I think life is all about purpose. We have to have a reason to get up in the morning. And if the reason to get up in the morning is to see someone home, to see them through something that there isn't anybody better suited to see that person through, there's something sacred about that. There's something very honorable about that. There's something very personally satisfied about knowing that, in it, by my faith, I'm God's hands and feet. God's not asking me to do this perfectly. He's not asking me to do anything more than do it and to stay faithful to it. You know, but that's that's heavy. That is really, really heavy. And especially for someone like me who really wasn't a compassionate person. I'm learning a lot about compassion. And it's me growing in terms of being able to do that. But the other thing that I think is important for all of us, especially as we age, is why am I here? What benefit do I bring? My grandkids don't need me anymore. My grandchildren certainly don't need me anymore. You can only play so much golf or tennis or go to the beach or whatever. And it's like, well, why am I really here? What purpose, what value do I bring to humanity? And so it's a two-step process because you have to basically understand, where do I get satisfaction out of my day? Where do I continue to grow as an individual while I'm still being a caregiver? Because that has to be my number one priority. Would I love to be able to do more? Absolutely. I can only do so much because of my schedule. But the other side of that is I continue to grow as a human and I continue to interact. And I think that's where COVID taught all of us. We're not meant to go through life alone. None of us are. We are meant to go through life together. And that's where meaning comes in. That's where the real meaning in life is sharing whatever it is that you find purpose in with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That for me, it gets me up. It gets me up every day and says, yep, I'm going to do all these things because they're important to me.
I'm a bit shocked to hear that you're not a compassionate person. But you have that.
I am learning.
You must be the most rapid student of compassion that I've ever seen. Because if anybody would have asked me, look at people around that who do you think is not a compassionate person? You would be at the end of that list.
Well, thank you, but you give me too much credit, believe me. But I have been able to turn a very negative situation into a fairly positive one. It's not at all what I imagined my life would be in my early 70s, but it's my reality. And we all have realities that we may not have signed up for, but we can all use those realities to find joy.
I think that's such a beautiful note to finish our conversation today. But I do hope you return back, because I think we can discuss grief and we can discuss organizing support groups and so many other things. And thank you so much for listening and being with us. And Pat, thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing. And there's just so much light coming out of you. And knowing
Thank
that
you.
you're on this hard journey, and yet it's such a truthful joy that radiates from you. It's so beautiful and inspiring to watch.
Thank
you.
Appreciate it.